Hi, it's Adam, and welcome back for video 6 in the Dominion tutorial. In this video, we're going to talk about something that I do at the start of every single one of my videos and before I play any game of Dominion. In those moments where you're looking at the board before you even make a move, you're looking and seeing what's there and thinking about what your strategy is going to be, and this is what I do. So, I'm looking at 10 cards, and I want to build an engine. Why do I want to build an engine? Because that's the best thing you can do in Dominion. So I want to try and do it, and most of the time you're going to be able to do it. The thing is, if you're going to build an engine, you have to find a way to justify all the extra building you're going to do with some kind of payload. And that payload needs to be more than just one province per turn, like I talked about earlier. Also, when you're thinking about this engine you're going to build, you want to compare it to at least big money. Big money is always available, and so if it's best, you can assume that a competent opponent will be playing it and probably beating you because it was best. So I always like to compare what I'm doing to big money. Now, in a two-player game, if I'm comparing myself to big money, it's a pretty safe assumption that my engine will be uncontested. And this is kind of a difference between two-player and multiplayer games. In a two-player game, if my opponent's playing big money, my opponent's probably not buying very many villages. So if my deck needs 10 villages to work, then if I'm playing big money, I'm going to get those 10 villages, or I'm going to get most of them. If I'm playing against someone else who's playing an engine or a similar strategy, maybe I won't get all 10 villages, and yes, maybe as a result, my deck will be worse than big money. On the other hand, I'm not playing big money at that point in time, so that's not really a comparison that has to be made. In a three-player game, if two players are going for this deck, they can test each other, their decks aren't good, a big money player could win. So that's something that's more complicated to think about, and it requires you to read your opponents after the game has started and see what they're going for. So also you have to know how good decks are when they're contested and compare that to big money. In a two-player game, that's not a comparison you really have to make, so it's not terribly important. So that's an important distinction. Another goal that you should have in mind when assessing a kingdom is you want to figure out the landscape of the game. And what do I mean by that? Basically two things. How much control am I going to have over what cards are in my deck? So if there's trashing, that affects things. If there's junking, that affects things. If there's junking and no trashing, that really affects things. So if you have more control over your deck, your potential is bigger, and that sort of leads into what are the best possible turns you can expect to have. If you get done with your analysis and you're not really feeling good about your prospects, then going for an engine where you invest in getting a lot of action cards might not be nearly as good as getting silvers and golds and trying to buy provinces the old-fashioned way. So the whole point of this, we want to figure out what our deck is going to look like. And in the next video, we're going to try and talk about how to get it there, which is kind of a different discussion. So, at the beginning of every game of Dominion I play, I run down this list, and it's in this order for a reason. I want to talk about it. First thing I look for is attacks. If there's a good attack, you can assume a competent opponent's going to play it on you. So, if Militia's out, you can assume you're going to be starting a lot of hands with only 3 cards. If Witch is out, you can assume that you're going to be getting some purples this game. So you got to deal with that, and the rest of your strategy has to keep that in mind. If there's a way to defend against these attacks, you look at how good it is. Lighthouse is pretty great for defending against attacks. So if my strategy involves an all-in attack onslaught to shut my opponent down, and my opponent can just pick up lighthouses, well, then I need to rethink my business. Trashing also kind of works with defense. Trashing is kind of one way to kind of clean up the mess after your opponent junks you. So if there's, cursing attacks and trashing, you probably want to invest in both. But if there's no trashing, then, the attacks can have their effects magnified on you. So that's something you have to keep in mind. So those first two things are really how much control you're going to have over what's in your deck, what your turns are going to like, and, what's not in your deck. So that kind of educates the rest of what you're looking for. You're going to be looking at the rest of this stuff in the context of how much control you're going to have in your deck. So the next 3 categories of things that I look for are kind of together. I look for villages, and we talked about villages, anything that allows you to play more than one terminal action in a turn. So if there are no villages, you only get one terminal, and it's hopefully great, because if it's not great, then you have a problem. Your payload, the cool stuff you can do is going to be limited. You'll have to look at what non-terminals are out there, the one terminal, and see if that's what you're happy doing. A lot of times the number of terminals you're going to play is limited. If Necropolis or Crossroads is the only village, that's another way you can be limited. On the other hand, remember, if we're playing a 2-player game, we can assume we're not contested, so we'll have at least 10 villages. So that's sort of the categories of what you're looking for villages. Draw. So we talked about what draw cards are, anything that increases your hand size. When I'm looking for draw in this context, though, I want to be thinking about just ways to put better cards in my hand. So, yes, if I play a beggar, I've increased the number of cards in my hand. However, I increase it by adding coppers, which are bad cards. So unless I have some way to translate that into more cards, which, pro tip, that's really stinking hard to do, so probably not worth it. Then I need to not consider that as draw. Likewise, if my village is festival and my draw only adds 2 cards to my hand and there's no other way to increase hand size, then I can't actually increase my hand size, because I won't have if I play a festival and then say a moat, then I still have 5 cards in my hand. Granted, I have some benefit from it, but I haven't increased the number of cards in my hand. So these are kind of limits to put on the draw, so you can make sure that you're not imagining a deck that's possible that really isn't. And then finally, I look for payload in the form of plus buy or gainers or maybe other types of payload. I've lost a lot of games by building this great engine that draws its deck and plays a bunch of cards and gets $55 a turn, and only 1 buy, and I'm down 5 provinces to 0. And I can get a province every turn, but I can't win the game because there was no great payload. So make sure that that's there, and if it's crappy payload, make sure that everything else is strong enough so that you're not going to lose the game. On the other hand, if the payload's really big, you can sometimes afford to get really far behind. So these things, once you have an idea of what the good turns, the best possible turns look like, in the context of all these things that you've looked at, you can decide if an engine is going to be worth it. If it's close, usually you want to go for the engine. Engines have a lot of advantages over big money. They can play attacks, they can shut their opponents down a lot, they have control over when the game is over, and there are a lot of surprising comebacks that can happen when engines are around. So usually you just want to play the engine anyway if there's any doubt in your mind, but the more you look at boards, the more you hear me look at boards, using this method, you're going to get used to knowing pretty fast what's out there, and you're not really going to be missing a lot. So I really recommend this, although it's not the only way. So use whatever works for you. On the other hand, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about this. I've been using it for years, and it works pretty great. So I would recommend it. Next video, we're going to talk about, once we know what our deck looks like, how to get it there the best we can and win. So I'll see you then. Bye.